right.
Turn left at the stop sign.
I'm here in Durham, North Carolina, getting ready to go to Vince Simonetti's Tuba Collection Museum.
In 1/4 mile, arrive at 1825 Chapel Hill Road on the left.
It's a bright yellow house on the left. And there it is.
Arriving at 1825 Chapel Hill Road on the left.
The historic tuba collection. All right. All right. The museum is open by appointment.
This is we call our featured collection because each one of these instruments either has a unique design feature or a unique history. These are two of the most unique ones, and I'll explain in a minute. But I usually ask folks when they, newer folks that have not been here before, if they know why the tuba family is different from the trumpet family, the trombone family, and the French horn family. Do you know?
Well, that would be the bore.
Right, because
the largely conical bore.
The conical bore as opposed to the cylindrical bore. You got it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then I usually go into the fact that brass instruments have to be airtight throughout their length, but like all acoustical instruments, they have to have some way to change the length. And the earliest, and in an airtight manner. And the earliest way of doing that successfully was the trombone slide, which goes all the way back to the 15th century. But they couldn't machine airtight valves until around 1813. And the piston valve was first. The rotary valve came quite a bit later, about 1835. But the tuba is the only family of brass instruments we know the exact starting date, because in 1835 Johann Moritz and Wilhelm Wieprecht in Germany, Berlin, Germany, invented this thing, and they patented it. So it was a patent that was filed in 1835, and it was the first time that the word tuba was applied to a chromatic bass brass instrument. So that's the beginning of the tuba, and that's 1835. And this instrument is still in existence in a museum in Berlin. But our oldest instrument is this, which is 1845. And as you can see, it's very similar.
Very similar
to that. And I was thrilled when the person called me, many years ago now, at least 15, and said he had this.
And it's got the Berliner Pumpen valves.
It's got the Berliner Pumpen valves, right? And it's practically identical. It's interesting, though, it was made in Denmark.
Oh, yeah. Those are beauts. I would love to get my hands on one of those.
And the fellow said he had it in his closet, it belonged to his father, and he had no idea what it was. And when he sent me pictures, I couldn't believe it. So we were delighted to get it. And then I go into talking about the difference between piston valves and rotary valves. Piston valve and rotary valves do the same thing. When you press this, it adds this much additional tubing to the overall length. This is, of course, a half step. This is a whole step. The third valve is a step and a half. And the reason why these two are unique, because as you can plainly see, this instrument has two bells. And it's called a double-billed alto horn. And why is that so unique? Because apparently they only made very few of these. The bigger cousin, the double-belled euphonium, was very popular. And we have, I don't know, about 10 of those or more. And but this is the only double-belled alto horn that I know of that's out there. I think there are about 4 or 5.
I think I may have seen one somewhere, but I can't think of where.
Right.
Maybe it was here.
It might have been here. And this gentleman was the original owner. His granddaughter, who's now living in a rest home, called me, and a few years ago, it was in 2014, and said, I have my grandfather's double-belled alto horn. And I said to myself, no, you don't.
It's an euphonium, yeah.
You have double-belled euphonium, but she was correct. So we were delighted to get this. And as you know, these are the valves to play the instrument, and this is the changeover valve for the other bell. And some people called this an echo bell. And double-belled instruments became popular toward the end of the 19th century, and they lasted in popularity here until the 1950s. And they died out for 2 reasons. One was that you very rarely used this second bell, and it added a lot of weight. And when American players started playing the English compensating euphoniums, they said, you know, we're through with these.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, the echo bell, because that does have a bit more of a very wide throat just at the end. And not all the altonium bells on a double bell euphonium are that generous in bore just before the bell flare.
Right.
So I wonder if that is kind of, instead of more of an altonium style bell, in order to give it a brighter sound than the normal instrument, maybe that one gives it a darker sound than the normal instrument.
That's right. And people were trying to figure out why, you know, that's supposed to be like, I believe, a euphonium and a trumpet.
Right.
But
or,
here,
yeah, a brighter sound with a small bell.
Okay, I guess you could say this is a trumpet, more like a cornet.
Yes, yeah, it's like a flugelhorn bell stuck on
exactly.
On an alto horn.
And probably, apparently they only made them in 1880s and 1890s. And they didn't sell very many, so they stopped making them.
And then, of course, the one on the left, the one with the Vienna valves.
The Wiener Pumpen, yeah.
On first impression, it looks like it's just a rotary valved instrument, but it isn't. It's a Vienna.
Right, and what I do with people who don't know, like you, I show them the rotor, the normal rotary, and I explain how it works, where you have the finger button, you have a linkage arm, and when you do that, it turns the rotor in a rotary manner, hence the name rotary valves. And but it does the same thing as the piston, where when you press it, it adds additional length. When you release it, it subtracts that length. And here, then I ask people, well, what is this? Is this piston or rotary? And some people say both, and they're correct, because it's 2 pistons per valve, but you have a linkage arm and a finger button and so forth, similar to the rotary valve design. And this is still in use, as you may know, in Vienna.
Right.
And they're French horns only. And again, this is one of the very few members of the tuba family that I know of that has the Wiener Pumpen valve system on it.
And it's a beautiful horn, too.
Well, thank you. It's got a very nice seal. And we got that in 2017. And again, delighted to get it. And I have another instrument that I haven't mounted yet that I've just gotten that I'm going to hang here. It's a Con Helicon from about 1880. And it has the Stölzel piston valves.
Oh, yeah.
And my helper has been, he's a school child and he's going back to school, so he hasn't been able to help me. But I'm going to hang it here and see that, and that'll be incorporated with this because that is completely unique. There are very few Stölzel valve instruments around, and it's in beautiful condition. Let me just bring it out here and show it to you. That recording you're listening to, that's Jim Self, who's exactly my age, but he can still play unbelievably. See, unlike the Pyrenees pistons or even the Berliner Pumpen, that in this system, the tubing comes out of the bottom of the piston.
I think that is the first tuba-size instrument I've seen that has Stölzel valves. I mean, they're common on cornopians and things like that.
Yeah, this is extremely rare. And a friend of mine who's a fellow collector, oh gosh, his name will come to me, but he was kind enough to help me get this. So as I said, I want to hang this, and that's going to be my project for this weekend, so it can be incorporated with this group here. Yeah, it's in very good condition.
Little oil and it'll be off to the races with it.
Have you ever played a Stölzel valve instrument?
I have a couple cornopians that I don't play because I'm a tuba player, but I've blown on them, so, and I've lent them to friends of mine who are trumpet or cornet players, and they're always amazed by how well they play.
So they do play well.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I'm wondering why they didn't continue with this.
Well, I think one of the things is they tend to have very sharp turns where the valving comes in and has to mic at a right angle,
right.
And that may cause some anti-node issues and things. I'm not really sure. They may be just a maintenance headache because you can't get in the bottom of the valve to clean them out.
Well, that's true. Show them this. Then I have to say that before airtight pistons were viable, or they could be manufactured, which was about 1813, they tried other systems, which of course was the keyed brass. And this is the latest version of the chromatic bass brass keyed instrument, the ophicleide. But the earliest, and then I show them the Serpent, is this. And I like to show them this, which is also from the Cliff Bevan book. And show them how the fellow's trying to figure out where to put his fingers. And then I show them the Russian bassoon, which was another version of a keyed bass brass instrument. Like the Serpent, it's wood, but it has finger holes like the Serpent, but it has a few keys. And then the final version was the ophicleide, which actually was invented around 1817, a few years after the piston valve. But as you probably know, the inventors of Wieprecht was a band director. So the piston instruments were used mostly in bands. Orchestra people used either the Ophicleide or the Serpent in orchestras until about the 1890s. And in France, they used this up until into the 20th century in orchestras.
Oh, yeah. Well, an Ophicleide in the right hands sounds wonderful.
Sounds great. I'm trying to remember Velvet Brown. You remember Velvet Brown?
I know the name, yeah. I don't know the person in person, but yeah.
On a large contrabass tuba, pistons maybe get to be 6 or 7 inches long. The diameter of that. And see, this, as I said, is our featured collection because these either have a unique design feature or a unique history. What is the unique feature on this?
Well, it's a monster. It's a Kaiser, for one thing. And it does only seem to have 4 valves. It has a really small bell for the size of instrument. And it's probably in C, is it?
No.
Oh, it does say BB flat there, yeah, so.
Well, let me give you a hint.
Let's see, what am I doing here? Okay, I mean, it is rotary, but what's special about the rotors? Well, I mean, yeah, the bore is huge.
0.90 inch.
Yeah.
The largest valve bore in the building. Years ago, when I still had the Tuba Exchange, a dealer called me from New England, said, we have this old German tuba, you know, we want to sell it, are you interested? I said, well, what's the bell diameter? And he said, 17 and a half or maybe.
Like it's a little E flat or something.
Yeah, I thought, well, geez, it's got to be a small bore. 0.90 inch.
It's like an experimental horn. It's like, why put such a small bell on a horn that big?
Well, it's probably for the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And, you know, they probably were trying to crash into the U.S. market.
Make it, you know, if they're not worried about projection and so on. I guess, I'm trying to think, what application would you use a horn that big when you're trying to get a huge body of sound and then have such a small bell on it?
Oh, the throat is pretty
Oh, yeah.
big.
No, the throat's huge. It's just the last flare.
Flare on it. And I've got a few instruments with the so-called stovepipe bell, which doesn't work. And why they did that, I don't know. But so then I say, you know, pistons on a big contrabass tuba are maybe 6 inches. The rotor on a giant rotary tuba is maybe 1.5 inches by 2 inches. Then I come over here and show them this.
Right.
That's got to be the world's largest rotary valve on a brass instrument.
And I'm trying to, what did that guy do? It switches 2 different bores or something, doesn't it? Yeah, it's a double tuba.
Watch this. We said 6 inches, right? 6, 7,
Super
8,
long,
9.
super
Because
long
that's
piston.
2 sets of tubing coming off of each piston. And the way it works, it's very complicated.
But it all ends up reconverging for the bell.
Yeah, see, now, when you do that, it turns this ginormous rotor, deflects the bugle from the long double B flat 17.5 foot length to the short F length of 12 feet. Mm-hmm. Plus, you have this teeny rotor that works in conjunction with this, and it diverts the lead pipe from the front set, which is the F, to the back set, which is a complete set for the double B flat.
Right. So really the whole middle section of the instrument is doubled.
Right. It's 2 instruments, a B flat and an F tuba smooshed together and linked with this and that. The problem is it weighs probably over 50 pounds.
And it's got to be really hard to keep that big one lubricated and airtight too, I would imagine.
Exactly. And it doesn't work very well. I found this many, many years ago, probably 30 years ago, in somebody else's collection on the West Coast. And I bought it from him. And then we have another double tuba, this one, which is totally different. And then I point out again that a rotor on a double, on a large contrabass tuba is maybe 2 inches by 1.5. This has a rotor that goes from here to here. It's like 7 inches. And here's the trigger for it. You press that, it turns, and it instantly adds all the additional tubing length to go from the short F length to the longer double B flat length. The weird thing is that the bugle doesn't change at all. Mm-hmm. But it actually plays better than that.
Oh, I would imagine.
Plus, it's much lighter.
Right.
And I got this from a community band in the western part of Virginia in the mountains. They called me and said, we found this instrument in our closet, we have no clue. And when they sent me pictures, I said, I'll take it, I'll give you anything you want. And it turned out that this belonged to K. Vinyl Smith. Do you remember him?
No.
He was the tuba player in the Boston Symphony before Chester Schmitz. I don't know if you remember him.
I do, yeah.
And this fellow was there, I think, from the late 40s until the late 60s, K. Vinyl Smith. But he started out in the orchestra as the bass trombone player. And he was sort of demoted to tuba. They didn't have auditions. They just said, can you play tuba? And he probably said yes. So they said, well, we need you to play tuba. And I met him when I was a student at Manhattan School of Music in the early 60s. Up until recently, fairly recently, preferred one valve system over another. In US, England, France, Belgium, everything was piston valve. And from the beginning of the 20th century to the mid 20th century. But there was one exception to that in the US, and it was NHY King. They were the only ones that made rotary valve tubas in any number, but they only did it in the 1930s. From about 1934 till about 1940, that was it. And we were fortunate to have 2 of the symphony models. This one has a 750 bore. The other one has a 689 bore. The other one is silver plated. And they came with this stand which allows you to raise it up or down. And they were meant to be played by double bass players who stood up.
Yeah, very long bodied.
Over and you just play the tuba without having to pick it up. That has a testimonial from a Hollywood studio player who says this is the greatest thing since sliced bread for him because he played bass and tuba. And it made it easy for him. And the poor fellow who brought this in to me said, I've been trying to carry this around the band rehearsals, and it had 3 cases, one for the bell, one for the body, and one for the stand. He said, I can't deal with it anymore. I said, I'll give you anything you want for it. So, but then we have another one I'll show you. Okay, so, and you know, I can go on about several of these other instruments, like what is the unique about that instrument?
Well, the rotaries are in a different place.
Yeah,
that's one thing. It has a very large bore.
That's a Chervany. They invented that type of rotary position. They call it Walzerventilen or side valves, and we call them side roller valves. Mm-hmm. See, the linkage arm is very short, so it has the feel almost of a piston. Mm-hmm. But they patented it, and I have a B flat, an F that's next to it. I have an E flat over there, and I have a Chervany euphonium with roller valves.
And they have the thumb screw to adjust the springs, it looks like.
Yes. In fact, the very first instrument I ever collected, Paul, was this one.
Oh, yeah.
This beautiful Helicon. It's got the side roller valves, and every valve is a different bore size. It's conical throughout the valve section. And it has the spring linkage adjustments. I used to use that in parades in Dixieland.
My friend in Chicago has one nearly identical to that. I'm pretty sure it has the side roller valves, but I'm not absolutely positive.
There's another Chervany that does not. That's a newer one.
Over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. I just haven't seen it recently to be sure, but I thought there was something unusual about the valves on it. That seems more like it to me. I've actually played it a couple of times.
Yeah, they played very well, as I remember. I haven't played it in decades, but when I had my business, we would go to conventions, and the biggest one at the time, no longer is, was the Frankfurt, in German it was Frankfurt Musikmesse, Frankfurt Music Fair. And dealers from all over the world would come from, and manufacturers from all over the world would come. And I went, my wife and I went, and one year, and the Chervany had a big booth. And I told them, you know, I had a business, and I said I wanted to visit the factory, the Chervany factory, and they said, there are no roads leading to the factory. I said, okay. And I point out the fact that most of these instruments say CG Con, CG Con, CG, because CG Con, as you know, was the largest American maker, and for a while the largest in the world. From about 1905 to the 50s, it was considered one of the largest musical instrument makers. So we have more Con-made tubas than any other maker. I think it's close to 50. And I point out the fact that all the ones on that row are double E-flat tubas. That means they're approximately 13 feet long, but they're all different sizes. And that's because the catalogs in those days, in the early part of the 20th century, were like half an inch thick, because if you needed a tiny one to play solo, they'd do it. Medium size, large, or jumbo, they would do it. And then I point out the fact that tubas, the first tuba was an F, that's 12 feet, but by 1850, Chervany had already made double B-flat instruments and double C instruments. So by the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, the tubas had gotten really huge. So to march with something like that would be tough. Not impossible, but tough. So the Helicon was the first marching type of instrument. They started making Helicon-shaped instruments in the mid-19th century. And, but the famous band director, John Philip Sousa, became disenchanted with this bell configuration because you can't alter it. It's fixed. And if you put it on, it goes sideways, which is great for parades, but if you're sitting down and somebody's next to you, they're in trouble. So I tell that around 1891, Sousa asked, it was either J. Pepper or Kahn, to make the first Sousaphone. But it didn't look like this.
A rain catcher.
It looked like that.
Yeah.
And I tell people they quickly became known as rain catchers. And he wanted to look like that because he wanted the shoulder instrument to mimic the concert tubas. And he wrote that he wanted the sound of the tubas to float over the top of his bands like frosting on a cake. Was paraphrasing what he said. But a few years after the Raincatcher came out, they started making bell front instruments, which caught on. He preferred that, of course, and they lasted he died in the mid-1930s, and so they lasted through that. However, I have a Kahn catalog from 1959 that offers both bells for sousaphones. But I was in high school in the 50s and played sousaphone. I never saw a ring catcher. We should have it more prominent. But see back there, we have a 26J, which is for front action, short action. That's the only one I've ever seen.
Yeah, I remember seeing it in the catalog, but I'd never seen one in the flesh except for the one you have here.
And then we have a 21J up there. And I have some sousaphones with the short action valves.
Oh, there's your 25J. Yeah, I knew you had one.
Is this 25J? Excuse me. I thought
The one on the right there. Yeah.
I thought it said 21J.
But
yes, so there was the 20J and the 21J. But then I thought they only skipped one. I guess no. That says 25J. I'm wrong. Okay. Yeah. So then. Let's see. Then I take them in here, and this is some larger sousaphones, and I mentioned that they would make small, medium, large, or jumbo. This 46K was the largest production model sousaphone that Kahn made. Then I like to tell a story. It's kind of a sad story. There was a fellow named Keith Malin who played in the Navy band. And he was, in his 30s, but apparently one day in front of his computer he just keeled over. He had a heart attack.
Mm.
And his wife called me when I still had my business and said he had one of these, 46Ks. Would I sell it for her? I said, of course. So she sent it. And a month later, a Mexican banda came in here. And they had a tuba player who was like this tall. But he saw this and his eyes went bomb. And he said, I want that. I said, no, mucho grande, mucho. No. So they bought it for him. But a week later, they brought it back. He couldn't deal with it. It was too big.
Oh yeah.
Imagine trying to play that thing in a parade or something. It must weigh close to 50 pounds.
One of the guys I see in the Chicago area tuba Christmases it's not the Kahn, it's I don't know, the King or something, their equivalent.
This, I believe that one back there is giant. It might be that, but I have a Busher over here that's unbelievable. No, Martin. Look at the bell. That's a 30-inch bell on that turkey.
30-inch bell, gosh.
We're looking at that makes me so nervous because if we ever have an earthquake here,
it's coming down.
It's coming down. And we did have an earthquake here once. It was minor. It was about 12 or 13 years ago. It was around Washington, D.C., and we could feel it here. Okay, so then I talk about valve bore, and I show them what valve bore means, the diameter of the air passage, through the ports in the piston. And it's this is about 750, which is large, but this is a large instrument. If you had a tiny valve bore, it would be a mismatch, and you wouldn't get the resonance. So this is 750, and this is a jumbo. But then over here, we have a mammoth. Why is it a mammoth?
Gotta love the fine threads.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, very noticeable difference.
The Kahn is 750. The Lion and Healy is 850.
Do you know who actually made that for Lyon & Healy?
I'm pretty sure it's in France.
Yeah, somebody in France.
It's a French maker, because I have a French tuba in the back that has very similar valves. They're not quite this large, but I'm almost certain it's France. And this is the largest piston valve bore in the building. So that rotor is 0.90, this is 0.850. What's going on here? Somebody, probably me, screwed up this kit. It's stuck on there, I gotta fix that. Well, you know, this instrument was made almost 100 years ago, and look, it's in very good shape.
Oh yeah, plating's good. Maybe it didn't get used all that much.
Apparently not. And then I take folks to where you're looking at, and I point out the fact that certain countries preferred one valve system over the other. U.S., England, France, Belgium, piston. These are all English instruments, they're all piston valve. But Germany, Austria, Italy, Eastern Europe, all rotary valve, and these are all German or Eastern European makers. Miraphone is still being made. And they started in the, after World War II, they were expelled out of what had been part of Germany, which was now Czechoslovakia. And they were expelled into southern Germany. And from around 1960s, they started making instruments. And then in the early 60s, they started sending some to the U.S. and it became the professional tuba.
It's still my favorite. My main horn's still a 186 for you, just like that.
B flat or C?
B flat.
B flat. Yeah, they're good.
It just plays so well. I don't have a desire to. I've got 20 bass tubas, and that's the one I play 90% of the time.
Oh wow! Wow, I'd love to see your collection sometime. When I had my business, I sold miraphones. So we actually went to Von Kleinburg to see the factory. It was pretty impressive. I've forgotten the name of the fellow who was the manager. Yeah, I'm terrible with names, but he met us at, we went to Italy. Riva del Garda was that year the International Tuba Euphonium Conference was at Riva del Garda. So we went there, he met us there and drove us up through Italy into Germany to see the factory.
It was a nice factory too.
Yeah, we left from Munich by plane to come back here. So yeah, I have a 184, which I don't think they make anymore. The smaller model. They made a 186, a 185, which is quite rare, and a 184. I don't have any 185s, but this is one of the few front bell miraphones I've ever seen. And it's silver plated, which is also kind of unusual.
Well, you know, my first exposure to a rotary tube, my first exposure to a miraphone was an E-flat miraphone. I think it was basically the 184 design, but it was an E-flat instead of a double B-flat, but otherwise exactly the same shape and layout. But it had a recording bell on it, and it was in my junior high school. And that's what we played in concerts, and then I had a little Czechoslovakian piston valve, strangely enough, upright instrument that I had home for practicing that the school let me have. And if you ever want to see a picture of a dorky looking kid, is the one picture my parents took of me holding that instrument before going to a concert. I was wearing my full concert regalia with the tall hat they made us wear and everything, and the ropes around our shoulders, whatever those are called, and holding the beat up one that I wasn't going to use in the concert. It was the one we had at home, but I look at that picture and I said, that's the first picture of me playing a tuba, and I don't want to show it to anybody. I look so dumb. But yeah, there was a, forward bell mirrophone.
Yeah, well, I had one of these. The last instrument I played in the North Carolina Symphony. I originally came to North Carolina. I auditioned in New York to play with the North Carolina Symphony. And I played for 8 seasons. When I came, I had this instrument, or one exactly like it.
The Sander?
I bought it from Helleberg's last living son, who was in his 90s. I was going to Manhattan School of Music in New York, and do you ever remember Walter Sear?
I think I've heard the name, but I didn't know him.
He was the first tuba dealer only in the U.S. And he had a shop in New York. And my first C tuba was this. See, this says Walter Sear on it.
Oh, yeah.
He was the importer of the Prins and Mahillion Belgian tubas. But I'd never played C tuba before, and I didn't know these are not good. The G, which is open, it's like the F on the B flat tuba, is like a half step flat, and the intonation was horrible. And I didn't, I thought, and I was studying with Bill Bell, and he left to go to Indiana the year I got into Manhattan. I was so disappointed. But he would come back from Indiana to give us lessons. And when he played this, he said, I made a mistake letting you keep this instrument. So then I found out that August Helleberg's son, John Helleberg, had this for sale. So apparently it had one just like that. I ended up selling it to a fellow who was playing in the Louisville Symphony. I can't remember his name. So the last instrument I got was a 186.5, and the brass section just loved it. And it was probably the best instrument I ever had in the symphony. But yeah, so that's my story about mirrophones. But yeah, mirrophones just don't exist.
Well, the quality is at least as good as anybody's, if not better than a lot of them, and the designs are almost always very good.
Right.
And they've been around a long time. They've had a chance to refine them, and they just work.
Yeah, and I'm not sure he's still the manager, but the fellow who took me from Riva del Garda to Mirrophone was mainly an accountant. But his successor as manager was a fellow named Marcus Tyner, who was a phenomenal tuba player. And he developed a lot of their models. And he came here and he played this instrument. And he said it was one of the finest B-flat tubas he ever played, another Sander. And this is the same model, I didn't realize this, that Herbie Wexelblatt, who played at the Met for almost 40 years, played. That most of the instruments have the bells going straight up, but some don't. Some have the bells coming forward. And I asked them why. And most people don't know. And then I explained to them about the recording industry prior to the invention of electrical recording. If you went into a recording studio prior to 1929, you wouldn't see microphones because they hadn't been invented. You would see, there would be a room with giant funnels coming at you, and people would play trumpet into the funnel, trombone. But if you had a tuba like this, you'd have to pick it up and do that. So they bent the bell forward and called it a recording bell tuba. But of course the microphone was invented in 1929, but this lingered on, and King still offered and one in their catalog in the year 2000.
Well, they're still good for concerts in the park and things like that. Yeah.
Right, and because even if you have an upright instrument and you're playing indoors and there's no shell, you know, the sound goes up into the stratosphere.
Right.
It's hard to hear it.
Well, that's what I bought my 25J, was just so I'd have a big horn I could put as much through it as I could for some of these big outdoor concerts.
Right.
And I was tired of blowing my brains out on an upright bell horn and trying to have people hear me.
Exactly.
And so I said, I'm going to get a horn I can be as big as I want to be as a player and have the sound go out towards the audience instead of just up into the trees.
Right.
Otherwise it's unwieldy, but it works for that.
And then I point out that we have some King rotaries. This is a monster, model 1291, with a front bell. There's another one of those symphony models. That's the one with the smaller bore, but it's silver plated. Then I have this beautifully restored fixed upright bell one, all from the 1930s. I have another one over there. And then I don't know if I showed you this one. I forgot to show you this one. And I'm sorry, I'm digressing here, but
Oh, I love it.
this is one of 3 instruments made. This is the King C Rotary that William Bell played, his successor Joe Novotny played, and this fellow, Abe Torchinsky,
Oh, yeah.
who was in the Philadelphia Orchestra and the NBC Symphony. He sold this to a student of his in 1990, and that's who I bought it from. I've been trying to get one of these for decades. They apparently made only about 13, but they only made 3 with this tuning slide configuration. So you could get to the first or second, third, and fourth valves, or third and fourth. And that's the one that was played in the Philadelphia Orchestra and the NBC Symphony. The problem is the bore is tiny.
Yeah, nothing special.
It's
Kind of small.
It's very small. It's shocking. But Bell got the most gorgeous sound. I can still hear the sound he produced, and so did Novotny. I studied with Novotny. He took over for Bell at Manhattan when Bell left. He was a wonderful player. We didn't get along though, but he was a wonderful player. I take people over here, and I love to show people this instrument, which is a normal size sousaphone. This is the huge jumbo. This is from 1926, and it's in mint condition because no, this is before we put years. Back in the mid-90s, a fellow came in, a very elderly fellow, dragging this in a case, and he said, I want to sell it. He said, I bought it new in 1926.
Wow.
He was in his 90s. And he had put these cloths, protect from the shoulder, the hands, and the ground. We left it. But I've had some pros. Have you ever heard of James Jenkins?
That one doesn't ring a bell.
He plays in the Jacksonville, Florida Symphony. He's a monster player, monster. He came in second in Boston in the audition. He's African American, very fine player. He's a B-flat player. He said this was the best sousaphone he'd ever played. And it's, 1926. The pistons are almost perfect. They're not perfect, but, there is a little wear there. But not bad for almost 100 years old.
Wow. Yeah, they had good instruments.
Yeah, Colin was a fine maker.
I don't even know what's become of them. Are they just a brand name of somebody else now?
Somebody said they went to the factory. They're still making instruments in Elkhart. I didn't even know that. Now I bring folks here, and this is a display of more American-made instruments. And I point out that in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, there were up to 20 makers in this country. And now we had Kahn, started in 1874, and at Holton in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, at Elkhart, Indiana. We had York in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then we have Martin in Elkhart, Indiana, because he started working for Kahn and then started his own business. And so did Buescher. He started working for Kahn and then he opened his own business. So, as you know, Elkhart was known as the band instrument capital of the world because there were 5 makers there. And at one point. And then I asked folks who made the best American tuba. You know, right?
Well, I would have said Kahn, but I'm not sure that that's true. Well, York, right? York.
That's because of this.
Yeah, because of Arnold.
I'm one of the few people still alive that studied with Bill Bell and Arnold Jacobs.
Mm-hmm.
He helped me with the business too. And I saw this instrument. I went to his house to take a lesson. This was in 1969. I started in the symphony in 67. I wanted to go study with him. And I studied with him in 69 and 70. There were people to the foundries, and they would tap the brass to get a specific sound they were looking for, and it's very thick, much thicker than most of the others. So the sound is more organ-like. And when Donatelli was there with Jacobs at Curtis, Leopold Stokowski was the conductor, and he had been an organist. So his concept of the tuba was big organ sound. So I guess he sort of bugged Donatelli to get a bigger instrument. So Donatelli commissioned this instrument. But when he got it, Donatelli apparently was a very big man, and the instrument was big, so it just didn't fit him. So he sold it to a star student for $800. But when Jacobs finally retired from the orchestra, he was there from 1944 to 1988 in Chicago. And he told me the only reason why he had to quit was he couldn't see anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he didn't get cataract surgery. I think it was beyond that. So they asked to buy the instrument. You probably know the story. And he said, okay, because they only made 2 of these, and he had both. So they bought this one. He paid $800 from Donatelli. They paid him $30,000.
Yeah.
And Gene Picorni, his successor, is still using that instrument. And he's a wonderful player and a wonderful
Good guy, too.
Wonderful guy. You know, we were trying to develop a St. Petersburg C tuba. And we would go to the Midwest Clinic to exhibit, and I would take instruments over to Symphony Hall, and he would be so nice. He'd come down several floors, get the instrument, go back up. I was stunned what he had to do just to play the instrument. Serpent.
Oh, yeah. Military Serpent.
1830.
Yeah.
It's the oldest instrument in the collection.
Looks like it's in pretty good condition.
Yeah,
it's got some repairs and things.
Some repairs here and there, but for us it's
and it's got a canted out bell, which is slightly unusual.
Well, that's supposed to be for a military, is what I was told. And it's got these things called chimneys.
Right.
You're supposed to be able to pull them in and out to help the intonation. And this one has 5 keys, 3 in the front and 2 in the back.
Mm-hmm. I only have one. It's the same one that was brought up to you, a few years ago, and bought it. But I don't use it because I'm a church serpent player, and they just play better than the military ones.
Right, right.
And they're not so heavy, and they're more comfortable. And
yeah, and so we were delighted because, as I said, I've been trying to get an original Serpent that I could afford. But look at this instrument. What's unusual about this?
Well, got the rotaries at a funny angle.
Exactly. It's the only one in the collection that has that. Apparently this is the only maker who did that.
And now it seems like a bad idea because if you want to do any servicing on the valves, you can't get at the back side of them.
Exactly.
I'm not sure what they gained from doing it that way.
Well, you can't, there's no valve caps on the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
So you can only access it from the top.
Wow, yeah. It's like they did it just to be different without a good reason.
Right. And a lot of times they did that, I think it was some kind of marketing thing, you know, it could be different from everybody else.
Right.
And then I point out, you know, this is called our latest acquisition room. I just got this year. This we got at the end of 2019, or beginning of 2019. We just got this. This is the only J.C. Haynes instrument. I just got this. This is the latest acquisition of all of them. But I do point out that in the U.S. we had about 20 makers, but in Europe it was like a cottage industry. There were hundreds of makers. In the big cities like Nuremberg, there would be over 100 makers because they were very small. You know, do you remember Rudolf Meinl instruments? The first instruments, new instruments I sold when I started the Tuba Exchange in 1984 were Rudolf Meinl instruments. Millions of different makers. Rudolf Meinl was a tiny. You saw that garage in the back there? That's what their factory was, next to their house in what was it? Forgot the name of the town that he was in, but we drove there to visit him. And so there were hundreds of German makers, so I'm trying to get as many as possible. I have about 30. You know, there's no way I'll get them all. They're all gone, most of them, 99.9%. But this is a Rudolf from Goethe, a Sander from Kaiserlauten that's different from the one in the front, a Daimler from Karlsruhe, and this Bittner, which is the oldest double C tuba in the collection, from Nuremberg, and which has a stovepipe bell.
Right. No appreciable flare on it. It's like an Ophiclide.
Exactly.
Oh, wasn't mine a lot of Mainz?
No.
I thought...
No, there was a zillion Meinls. There was Gerhard Meinl. That was in Garrett Street. I went to that factory too. But there's a zillion Meinls. There's Wenzel Miner, there's Gerhard Meinl. Wenzel was Gerhard's father. And then there's Rudolf Meinl, and Rudolf Meinl Jr. is taken over now. I think the father may have passed away, but...
I was thinking of Meinl Weston. That's in Mainz.
That's in Garrett Street.
Oh.
That's the factory I went to.
Okay.
That's Gerhard Meinl. And Gerhard Meinl bought a bunch of different makers in Germany. He tried to make this big thing, but it didn't work out. He came here and gave a lecture when I first started the business in the late 80s, which is a York Sousaphone. You know, York, we said, was the best American maker. This I almost didn't get because I've run out of space. I can't buy duplicates anymore. But the fellow was kind enough who brought me this in, brought me a picture of his father who had gone to the Grand Rapids factory in 1932 to buy this Sousaphone. This has something no other instrument has. Look at the bottom of those pistons.
Well, they've got, is that a moisture release?
Exactly. You're the only one that's ever known what that is.
It was just a wild guess.
No, that's right. You know, it's got a spring-loaded thing. You really push it, it'll let the moisture out. But it still lets the air out, presumably. Apparently, because...
So otherwise you couldn't push the piston down.
Exactly. And those are big pistons. And that's 750 bore, just like the famous tubas. And so it's the only York. I've talked with other people who said they have Yorks with those on it. So apparently when he went to the factory, they said, we have these new gizmos, are you interested? And he said yes. That's the only reason why I bought that instrument. Plus the story was neat. And then we talked about valve bore. On tubas, usually the size of the bell gives you some idea what the valve bore is going to be. Of course, that big German instrument in the front didn't do that. But this instrument is a Hawks and Son E-flat Helicon. The valve bore is not tiny, so that's good. I mean, it's appropriate for this size instrument. But this is what, 13, 14 inches? But look.
Yeah.
That's the only other instrument with .90 bore in the building. Why they did that on this
kind of small instrument.
Small instrument is bizarre, but it's got a point.
Probably feels like blowing into a box instead of a tube.
Right. Yeah, so this instrument was made by Diston, who was an English man who had a family brass group and toured Europe. And they lived in England, but apparently they had some financial problems and emigrated to the U.S. in the 1880s. In 1887, he opened up his factory in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which is right in the middle of Pennsylvania, a little town, and made this Helicon, which has this incredible design work on the ferrules, on the brace plates, and on the guards.
Oh yeah.
And this fellow who donated this gave me this picture, and this is the pep band for the Washington Redskins, and look how they're dressed. That would be a no-no today. The name's a no-no, should be, but it's still used. But it was used in the band in 1937.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a story for each instrument, but we don't have time. Okay, let's go here. The last room is this room here. This features another maker, Kiefer. They were in Williamsport, where Diston was. Why? Because Kiefer was on the board of Diston, and in 1909 bought the Diston factory. And here's a beautiful example of a Diston euphonium with the beautiful design work. That's not engraving, that's stamped into the metal. And but this is engraving. This is very nice.
It is beautiful.
Yeah. So in 1909, Kiefer bought the Diston factory. It lasted until about the 1950s. But in 1918, they made this ginormous Helicon. This has the largest bell diameter of any Helicon in the building. And it's the only one where the bell comes off. Can you figure out why?
Just to get it around.
Exactly, for travel. They could do like the Sousaphone, they could put it in the middle so the case would be much smaller. Otherwise, if you couldn't take that bell off and you wanted to have a case, it would be huge. But again, it has the design work on the huge guard, on the brace plates, and on the ferrules. And we didn't, I also talk about finish. Now there's plain brass, and here the patina is built up for over 100 years, but if you polish it, it's beautiful yellow brass. Mm-hmm. Then there's silver plate, there's bright silver plate, and then satin silver, which nobody does anymore as far as I know. They actually sandblasted this silver plate and why would they do that? Because it doesn't tarnish. This tarnishes like crazy, look.
Yeah. I'm not sure why it doesn't tarnish, but you're right, I don't recall seeing any silver sandblasts that were particularly tarnished.
Yeah. And this is a rare instrument. It's the only rotary valve sousaphone in the building. It's interesting because the ferrule's design is different. So what I think happened was they got a customer who said, I want a rotary valve sousaphone. So they got this valve set from Germany or wherever and then just matched it.
One thing that's interesting about all of these Kiefers is that they don't have the usual gooseneck arrangement. The mouth pipes are more fixed like they would be on a typical Helicon.
Oh, I see what you're
instead
saying.
of having the typical Con, King, Holt, and gooseneck arrangement.
All right, very good. Yeah, and I noticed it. Very nice. Okay, then I point out that on piston valves, if you have a large bore, so if you had a .90 piston, the stroke would be like 4 inches, which would be unwieldy. So as you know, Con came out with their short action valve system.
Right, the kind of oval valve ports.
Right, and then I show the folks, this is not a short action, this is normal. They're normally as round as possible, but Con made it oval, the same space, but the distance from top to bottom was 25% shorter, so the valve stroke was 25% shorter.
Do you have any in your collection, I think it was Holton, that experiment with double ports? This one's got the pinched, but I know they have a small museum in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. I think it's Holton Museum. And they've got some examples where they actually split the tubes into 2 small tubes, and then they have 2 tiny ports, like trumpet-sized ports, and then they recombine them on the other side of the valve.
See, what I do, I tell people, I said, and this was another short action design, totally different, and I hide it, and I show them that. And they all go, what? And then I can do that.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically a rotary valve, which is, channel on both sides,
right,
cut in half, stacked on top of each other, and then they squeeze the ports going into the casing, so it basically goes from here to here. Ooh, what time is it?
It's 4:40 about. You have somebody else coming?
Group coming
oh,
at
yeah.
5. So,
Wonder how well that actually works.
You would not believe it. It's great. When I saw that, I said, "Oh, this is going to be horrible." It's phenomenal. It's great.
Have you? Do you know of Martin Wilk in Indiana? He mostly works on Martin instruments, strangely enough, but he has his own. He has his own brand of valve. They're made in Germany, I think, for him, but he retrofits them to horns, and it's kind of the same idea where he's trying to get rid of all the little tight knuckles, but he tries to make it work so the tubes coming in and out of the valves don't have to change, but the way the piston is designed is quite different.
No, I tried to design a piston, but I gave up. I'm not an engineer. And, this is pretty amazing, but they only did it from, as I remember reading, from 1934 till about 1940. Then that was it. And I have 2 instruments with this short action system by Holton. And when a guy called me and said he had this, he told me he had a Holton short action. I said to myself, no, you don't. You have a Con short action.
And there it is.
There it is. And then I have this one. So that's the end of the tour. Now I usually tell people, and I will tell you, we do not charge to come into the building to see the instruments, but we do accept donations. Anything you want to give would be greatly appreciated.
I'd be happy to do so.
But here, this is an amazing instrument in many ways. Because look at this engraving.
Oh yeah, look at that.
The name of that girl is Beverly June, so that's known as the Beverly June sousaphone. I bought that from Oh God, I can never remember his name.
Is this sandblasted?
I don't know, but that's gold plate.
Wow.
And that's the other one with the short action.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's basically it. I don't. But here I've got some incredible. That Alexander C tuba is a wonderful instrument. It's one of the finest C tubas in the building. There was a fellow that played in the Knoxville Symphony. His name was Sand McMorrin, and he had one of these. And he used to come here quite often. One day he played this and he got real angry. I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "This is better than mine, and it's just sitting here." I said, "Too bad."
Yeah. Your loss is my gain. Got the nice double bells up here.
Yeah, one of those. Have you ever heard of Brian Bowman?
Yeah, I know Brian.
Well, he came here and he said, "I want to borrow one of these. I'm going to play a solo on it." But he had some kind of argument with them, and he quit the band, and they canceled the concert. I was so disappointed. The whole thing went down the tubes. But it was either that con, yeah, it was that con, the 5L.
Yeah, I've got one double-belled Youth, and it's a con. It's all silver satin with a gold wash on the inside of the bell.
Yeah, here's another con 5L. That's short action, I believe.
Yeah, so is mine, yeah. That one's very similar to mine. I bought it from the Chestnut Brass Company when they had one too many of them. They ended up with a couple, and they were going to sell one to make money to buy something else.
That's the only rotary double bell instrument that I know of.
Wow. And that's
So, yeah.
What's the brand? It's a, Coleman.
It's got incredible engraving on the bell. My polisher has started, he didn't finish it. It was jet black. That's the problem we have. So many silver-plated instruments. The only one that doesn't tarnish is this one. But it tarnishes a little teeny bit. This is a Kuernel single C French tuba. You know what those are?
Yeah. I don't have one, but I know what they are.
I have two. I have a Mahayan with 6 valves, 4 at the top and 2 on the side, and this one. And this one, have you heard of Carol Yonks in the Philadelphia Orchestra?
I don't think so.
She's a woman tuba player, phenomenal player. She auditioned, I don't know, it was around 2000 now, or maybe, when they had an opening. And she beat out like 500 people, and she was a student at Michigan State or something. And she came here and she saw this. And a couple of months later, I get a call, and she said, "We're going to do pictures at an exhibition. And the conductor wants me to play an instrument, and you're the only one that has one." I said, "Well, I don't think that's true," but she said, "Will you rent it to us?" I said, "No." I said, "I'll give it to you as long as you give me tickets to the concert." So my wife and I and my daughter went up to Philly and heard her play it. She's a monster player. God. She had to do it twice. They had a special concert just of pictures, and the first half was multimedia. They had a screen where they showed the score, they had dancers, they had somebody narrating, and they went through the whole thing in that manner, and then after the intermission, they just played it straight through. So she had to play the solo twice on that. She's a wonderful player.
Was that on the Beadlow?
Beadlow,
Yeah.
This is the instrument that it was written for. But
Those are cool instruments.
my Beadlow story is, when I had my business, we would go to exhibit to conventions. And there was some convention at Northwestern University we went to. And this was around 1994. And Mr. Jacobs came. He died in '98, so he was He was about 80 years old then. And he was just barely moving. We had a room. Each exhibitor had his own room at Northwestern. And he came in with his wife, and it was great to see him. And he said, I want to play a small C tuba. So I handed him, maybe it was a piggy. And he proceeded to play the Bigelow solo perfectly. He was amazing.
Okay, well that was another fine visit here at the Vince Simonetti tuba collection, which I keep saying it in the wrong form. The historic tuba.
Reported on I-40.
The Vincent and Ethel Simonetti historic tuba collection in the distinctive yellow house. All right, it's 6 o'clock. No, it's 5 o'clock. My next stop is Nags Head, North Carolina, right on the coast. Unfortunately,
turn right at the stop sign.
I've enjoyed myself so much here that by the time I get there, it's going to be dark. Not much point of having a hotel.
In 1/2 mile, turn left on Shepherd Street.
Not much point in having a hotel on the beach if you get there after it's dark, but that's fine. That was sort of a last-minute hotel reservation anyway. And hopefully I'll get some good views there tomorrow.
Turn left on Shepherd Street, then take the first right.
So I was saying that tomorrow I'm going to continue my vacation with run up to Kitty Hawk. I just have to make my way through Durham here onto US 64 and start heading east. So basically the next 3 hours it's going to take to get there. Taking me through the neighborhoods. Anyway, we'll pick it up there.